Hello my dears, and welcome back to my corner of the internet. I'm Shannon. This back here is my October co-host Bernard. He doesn't say a whole lot, but he seems to certainly have a mind of his own. Anyway, today we are doing another sort of spooky type video. Today we're going to be talking about doppelgangers and a couple of really interesting cases from the past that involve doppelgangers, or ghostly twins as they're sometimes referred to. Now, in modern days, the term doppelganger, we've kind of just thrown around, meaning whenever we see someone that looks like someone we know. I've actually come across that a few times. On more than one occasion, I've had somebody come up to me and very confidently, not questioning themselves at all, begin talking to me as though I'm somebody that they know from somewhere else. And it's happened many times, like in passing, someone will say, oh, hi. And then once they get closer, they're like, oh, sorry, you're not who I thought you were. But there have been some instances where people are having full-on conversations, and it's so shocking that like it gets to the point where even at the end of the conversation, they still don't know that I'm not who they think I am. One time, I was sitting at a clinic waiting to see a doctor, and a woman came in and she sat down beside me. Like, she went in, she was talking to somebody, then she was leaving, and as she was leaving, she sat down beside me and she starts talking to me as though we work together at the local hospital. And it starts off, she asks, oh, what are you here for? And I tell her, oh, I think I might have an ear infection. She starts talking, and at first I thought she was just very friendly, but as it goes on and on, she starts referring to me as Michelle, talks about the next time we're going to be working together at the hospital, as though we do it quite frequently. And as it's happening, like, I'm so confused at first that I don't say anything. And then she finishes up her conversation, calls me Michelle again, and leaves. And I didn't say anything because I was so shocked. And that's happened a few times. Another time was at a restaurant. A different woman comes up to me, starts asking me questions that I don't know the answer to. Now that one I was able to get my wits about me soon enough to be like, oh, I'm not who you think I am. But like, the one at the clinic always really stuck with me because she works with that person. Like, how much do I look like this Michelle that, I don't know, it freaked me out a little. Anyway, we're not talking about that kind of doppelganger today. We're talking about the more supernatural type of doppelganger. And doing the research for this, as I was reading, it's so eerie and it's so creepy. So doppelgangers have long held a mythology about them that they're a very bad omen. They're very bad luck. And that if you see your own doppelganger, it's sometimes foretelling of death. Or if somebody else sees your doppelganger, it can be just a bad omen of bad luck. And again, not talking about just someone who looks like someone you know, but like the actual doppelganger. It's a complete and total replication of you. And one thing about them is they don't cast a shadow, whereas you would obviously cast a shadow. The doppelgangers don't. And it's often said that you don't want, if you ever come across your doppelganger, to not interact with it. Don't speak to it, because, you know, the mythology goes that it can actually put thoughts into your mind. And unfortunately, they're not good thoughts. You know, they can put the ideas in your mind, and then you put things into action that you don't want to be doing. So, yeah, if you ever see your doppelganger, don't interact with it. Another thing people would warn of is your doppelganger interacting with other people as though they're you, and doing things that would make you look bad, you know, things like that. So, but anyway, I have two specific cases that are both very interesting. One is a longer sort of case, and then another one's just kind of a quick little story, but they both involve ghostly twins. So the first one involves a school teacher, and her name was Emilie Sagee, and this happened in the 1800s, early to mid 1800s, and in France, I believe. And Emilie was a school teacher, and the weird thing was, if you were to look at her resume, It said in 16 years, she had taught at 19 different schools, which would make you think, well, maybe she's a really bad teacher, but anyone who worked with her or any of her students, they all really loved her, and her colleagues spoke highly of her, both as a person and as a teacher. So when a new school would hire her, it made them very confused as to why she had so many jobs in such a short amount of time. However, they soon found out. Now, this case was documented by an American writer in a book many, many years ago. And it was said that when Emilie, one of the first things that began to happen at this particular school, and this was an elite girls' boarding school. So Emilie was teaching, she's writing on the board, her back is turned to the students. The students reported that all of a sudden, kind of out of nowhere, an apparition manifested. And it looked just like Emilie. And it was mimicking what she was doing. As she was writing on the board, it was mimicking the motions of writing on the board. The only difference was this apparition of Emilie wasn't holding any chalk. It was just using its hand to make the motions. Super creepy. Shortly after that, it was reported to being seen again, only this time in the dining hall. Emilie was seated eating her dinner, and then it appeared behind her and once again was mimicking her motions, only it wasn't holding a fork. Again, just so creepy. And another thing that's really eerie is that Emilie herself, she reported that she'd never seen this apparition, but yet wherever she would go, people would report seeing it. Shortly after the dining hall incident, it seemed as though the doppelganger began to have a life of its own. And what I mean by that is, at one point, there was a class being held in one of the classrooms, and the teacher was in front of the class teaching. And the students, as well as the teacher, saw Emilie out in the garden, tending to the garden. She was down in the dirt, tending to the garden. And then shortly thereafter, the teacher left the room to go take care of something, and the doppelganger of Emilie walked into the classroom and sat at the desk. And at first, the students thought that Emilie had come in from the garden and was now sitting at the desk, but the students turned to look and saw that the real Emilie was still outside in the garden. One of the students was brave enough, she got up and she walked to the front of the classroom and she reached out to touch the doppelganger, and she reported that it felt like putting your hand through cobwebs. Like it felt that sort of texture. Terrifying. Anyway, it went on to be discovered that this had been happening to Emilie her entire life. Even back to when she was a child and lived at home. Her parents and her siblings all reported seeing this doppelganger around the house, to the point that it became so commonplace, like it didn't even freak them out anymore. They were used to seeing it. And like, say at one point, Emilie would be upstairs taking a nap and the doppelganger would be downstairs in the kitchen. But again, Emilie herself never saw it. Like after a while, you'd start to think that everybody was messing with you. So back in 1845, I was going to say back in the present, but not quite the present. Back in 1845, eventually word got out to the parents of the children who went to the boarding school, and they started to complain. And it got to the point that finally the principal felt like he had no choice but to let her go, which, you know, was too bad because Emilie herself was a fantastic teacher, and they all liked having her at the school. The children all liked having her as their teacher. But the parents were so disturbed by what they were hearing from their children that he just had to let her go. And one of the really interesting things about that is that was the last anybody heard of Emilie. There's no record of her getting another teaching job. And when people dug into it more, there was no death certificate ever filed for her either. So there's the birth record, but there's no record of her death. So wherever she went after that, I don't know if she went off the grid, if she just kind of disappeared into the shadows, but she was never heard from again. So that's such an eerie story, and it's so unbelievable to hear it. Like, it makes you think there's no way that happened. But then why? I don't know, like, why would so many people agree that that's what happened to the point that it got documented? Anyway, the other instance that I wanted to share with you is more of a quick short story, and it actually involves, this is actually one of the more famous people to ever report seeing their doppelganger, and it involves actually Abraham Lincoln, former president. And he reported that one day, it was before he won the presidency, he was still a candidate at that point. And one day he came home, he had been exhausted, he sat down in his living room, and at one point he glances over to the mirror that hung on the wall, and in the mirror he saw reflected his reflection, and then standing right next to it was a second reflection. And in his own words, he described that the second reflection looked like him but much paler. He described it as 5 shades paler. Very tired, very pale, very defeated looking. And he took that as a very bad omen, and he told his wife, and she was very disturbed by it, and she worried that it was, you know, kind of a foretelling of his passing. And, you know, the rest, of course, of that story's history. But yes, very, very eerie. And he told many people about it after it happened because he was so weirded out by it. Another little tidbit that I find very interesting, especially regarding the Emilie Sagee story, is that she reported that often she would feel very drained of her energy, very tired, almost unable to sit upright. And the people around her worked it out in that the times that she was complaining of feeling that way corresponded to times when the doppelganger was seen around the school. So it's almost like it was, as a, you know, ghostly twin, it was taking her energy, using her energy as it did whatever it had to do, or whatever it wanted to do. And it reminds me, hearing these stories, especially Emilie's, it sounds a lot like astral projection, only you're awake. And again, this is very different than just seeing someone who looks like you. Or, you know, if you're visiting another town and you see someone that looks just like your best friend Karen, that's not necessarily a bad omen. Because, of course, there are only so many genetic combinations, and then there are bound to be people who look similar to each other. This has nothing to do with that. This is more, you know, supernatural in nature. And it's always fairly close by to the actual body. But, yeah, it's so interesting. I also find so interesting, too, the, you know, when you'll see pictures from hundreds and hundreds of years ago and they look just like a current day celebrity. Like, I know Keanu Reeves has one where it's a picture from so long ago and it looks just like him. And like Nicolas Cage has one. I think Justin Timberlake has one too. And it's so eerie. And so the word doppelganger is German in origin. So, you know, obviously they've dealt with it in their mythology. But there are many, many other different races and groups of people that have similar mythologies, like Native Americans have them, and in Norse mythology there's the, they use a different word for it, but it's a similar type of situation, a double, a ghostly double, if you will. Anyway, you guys, let me know in the comments down below, have you ever experienced something like that? And if you have, girl, I'm sorry, because that sounds terrifying. And yeah, just let me know if you've heard of any other instances of someone going through something like that. Just sounds just awful. I hope you guys had a fantastic weekend, and I will see you very soon. Bye, guys.